Pentagon recently admitted that it really has been secretly studying UFOs and then it wanted to figure out and duplicate that technology.
For decades, Bob Lazar's story has been dismissed as unbelievable. A tale of secret labs, mysterious craft, and claims no one could prove. But now, new UFO evidence is emerging that appears to confirm what he said, leaving the entire world stunned. Recently uncovered footage and long-hidden details are surfacing, revealing strange patterns and connections that echo Lazar's original claims in ways that are impossible to ignore. One particular detail about how it was all handled makes the story even more chilling. A story that never changed. In a world where stories shift, crumble, and quietly rewrite themselves over time, one detail about Bob Lazar refuses to fade. His story has never changed. Since the late 1980s, when he first stepped into the public eye, Lazar has repeated the same account with a level of consistency that feels almost unnatural. No major revisions, no dramatic additions, no sudden contradictions. Just the same claims told again and again across decades. That alone is enough to raise eyebrows. Because if there's one thing history has shown us, it's that fabricated stories rarely survive time intact. Details slip, timelines blur, new elements get added to keep the narrative alive. Even the most convincing liars eventually lose track of their own version of events. But Lazar didn't. He stayed locked into the same description, the same location, the same technology, the same experience, as if nothing needed to be adjusted. And that's where the mystery deepens. Over the years, new information has slowly surfaced. Government acknowledgements, declassified reports, footage captured by military pilots showing objects moving in ways that defy conventional physics. Not proof, but enough to make people pause. Enough to make them look back at Lazar's words and wonder if they were dismissed too quickly. Because now, some of what he described doesn't sound as impossible as it once did. Still, consistency alone doesn't equal truth. That's what skeptics argue. Anyone can memorize a story. Anyone can commit to a version and stick with it. But here's the problem with that explanation. Maintaining a lie isn't just about remembering details. It's about surviving scrutiny, decades of interviews, endless questioning, changing technology, new evidence, different audiences. And through all of it, Lazar never broke pattern. He didn't escalate his claims to stay relevant. He didn't reshape his narrative to match emerging headlines. In fact, if anything, he seemed reluctant to revisit the story at all. No grand tours, no constant media appearances. Just a man repeating the same account when asked, and often avoiding the spotlight altogether. That behavior doesn't fit the usual script. So what are we left with? A story that refuses to evolve. A witness who refuses to change it. And a growing body of modern observations that, at the very least, echo parts of what was once considered impossible. But it makes one thing increasingly difficult to ignore. If this was a lie, it's one of the most consistent ones ever told. When reality mirrors the claims. For years, Bob Lazar's descriptions sounded like something pulled straight from science fiction. Craft that didn't fly the way airplanes do. No wings, no visible propulsion. Instead, he spoke of objects that could tilt, rotate, and move, as if gravity itself had become their engine. At the time, those claims were easy to dismiss. Too strange, too advanced, too far removed from anything publicly known. But then the footage surfaced. U.S. military videos, captured by trained pilots and advanced tracking systems, began circulating across the world. These weren't blurry civilian clips or distant lights in the sky. These were high-speed objects recorded by some of the most sophisticated equipment available. And what they showed was deeply unsettling. Craft with no wings, no exhaust, no clear method of propulsion. Yet they moved with precision and control that defied conventional understanding. They hovered. They accelerated instantly. They changed direction without slowing down. In some cases, they appeared to rotate mid-flight, reorienting themselves before taking off at speeds no known aircraft could survive. And that's when people started to notice something. The movements looked familiar, not because they had been seen before, but because they had been described before. Decades earlier, Lazar claimed that the craft he encountered didn't rely on traditional flight mechanics. He said they operated by manipulating gravity, allowing them to pivot, tilt, and move in ways that ignored inertia. One detail stood out in particular: the idea that the craft would angle itself toward its destination before rapidly accelerating. That exact motion now appears in modern military footage. Coincidence is always the safest explanation. Technology evolves. Military projects remain classified for years before becoming public. It's possible that what we're seeing today is simply the result of decades of secret innovation finally coming to light. But that explanation raises its own questions. If these are human-made craft, why do they behave so differently from every known advancement in aerospace engineering? Why abandon aerodynamic design entirely? And more importantly, how did someone describe these exact flight characteristics long before any evidence surfaced? That's where the line between skepticism and curiosity begins to blur. Because this isn't just about strange footage. It's about alignment. A rare moment where past claims and present observations seem to overlap in ways that are difficult to ignore. Not identical, not confirmed, but close enough to make people pause. And that pause is where the real tension begins. Because if reality is starting to mirror those claims, then we're left with a far more unsettling possibility. Maybe the story didn't change. Maybe we're the ones who are just now catching up. The night everything changed. There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. For Bob Lazar, that moment didn't come gradually. It came all at once, in a single realization that shattered everything he thought he understood. Before that night, he believed he was stepping into a classified program, a hidden branch of human innovation. Something advanced, yes. Secret, definitely, but still ours. That belief didn't last long. When Lazar first entered the facility, nothing immediately felt otherworldly. It looked like a military operation, controlled, structured, familiar in the way top-secret environments often are. At one point, he even saw an American flag inside the hangar. That detail grounded him. It confirmed his assumption. Whatever this was, it belonged to the United States. At least, that's what he thought. Then came the briefings. Piece by piece, the explanation began to shift. The language changed. The implications grew heavier. What he was looking at wasn't a breakthrough built by human hands. It wasn't a next-generation aircraft waiting to be unveiled. It was something else entirely. Something that didn't fit into any known framework of engineering or science. And that's when it hit him. The realization didn't arrive as excitement. It wasn't awe. It was disorientation. A quiet, internal collapse of certainty. The kind of moment where your mind tries to reject what it's hearing because accepting it would mean rewriting everything you believe about reality. He went home that night carrying more than information. He carried a question he couldn't escape. If this technology wasn't ours, then where did it come from? Lazar described lying in bed.
I'm convinced that what I saw is absolute proof of that. There is no way we could have created those systems.
Replaying every detail in his mind, every word, every explanation, trying to force it into something logical, something familiar. But the more he thought about it, the less it made sense. The world he thought he understood no longer felt complete. There was something hidden beneath it, something far bigger than he had ever considered, and there was no way to unsee it. That's what makes that night different from everything that followed. It wasn't about the craft. It wasn't about the technology. It was about the shift. The moment a person crosses from skepticism into something else entirely, not belief, not certainty, but awareness. An awareness that the boundaries of human knowledge might not be as solid as they seem. From that point forward, nothing looked the same. Every assumption carried doubt. Every explanation felt incomplete. Because once you've seen something that doesn't belong, you can't simply return to the idea that everything does. And maybe that's what stayed with him the most. Not the shock, but the permanence of it. Because some realizations don't fade with time. They settle in, quietly, constantly. And once they do, the question is no longer whether it was real, but how long it has been real without anyone noticing. Or how much has already been hidden in plain sight. And that is the part of Lazar's story that lingers. Not what he claims to have seen, but how it changed the way he saw everything after. The mission they couldn't explain. When Bob Lazar was brought into the program, the expectations were clear, at least on the surface. He wasn't there to observe. He wasn't there to speculate. He was there to solve a problem. A problem that, according to those running the operation, was already in motion long before he arrived. They gave him two directives: replicate the technology and find a way to disable it. Simple instructions, direct, almost routine for a high-level research project. But nothing about this was routine, because beneath those orders was a contradiction no one seemed willing to address. You can't replicate something you don't understand. You can't disable a system if you don't even know how it functions. Yet, that was exactly the position Lazar found himself in, tasked with breaking down technology that didn't follow the rules of known science. It wasn't just advanced. It was unfamiliar in a way that felt fundamental. The craft didn't rely on engines, fuel, or propulsion systems that engineers could map out and analyze. There were no clear components to trace, no mechanical logic to follow. Everything about it suggested a level of design that bypassed the incremental progress humans are used to. It wasn't the next step forward. It was something entirely separate. And that's where the real problem began. Because reverse engineering depends on reference points. You compare, you test, you isolate variables. You build understanding piece by piece. But what happens when there are no reference points at all? When the thing you're studying doesn't align with anything you've ever seen, built, or even theorized? Progress slows. Then it stalls. Lazar described an environment where effort didn't match results, where scientists were cycling through the same approaches, hitting the same walls, and producing little to no meaningful breakthroughs. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked context. It's like trying to recreate a language you've never heard, using symbols you can't interpret, and still being expected to succeed. The second directive made it even more complicated. Disable the technology. That implies something deeper, not just curiosity, but caution. Whoever initiated the program wasn't only interested in understanding the system, they were concerned about controlling it, containing it, possibly even defending against it. But how do you neutralize something you can't even explain? That question hung over everything, because the mission itself revealed the truth no one wanted to say out loud. This wasn't a project built on mastery. It was built on uncertainty, on fragments of knowledge, on the hope that somehow human logic could catch up to something far beyond it. And that's what makes this part of the story so unsettling. Because if they were trying to control it without understanding it, then something had already gone wrong. And when control comes before comprehension, mistakes become inevitable. The real risk wasn't just failing to replicate it, but triggering something no one was prepared to face, or even recognize when it happened. It wasn't just that the technology was unknown, it was that the people studying it knew they were already behind. a system designed to fail. At first glance, the program appeared built for success. Unlimited resources, elite scientists, a problem important enough to justify extreme secrecy. Everything you would expect from a project meant to unlock something revolutionary. But beneath that surface, there was a flaw so fundamental it threatened the entire operation. The scientists weren't allowed to work together. Instead of collaboration, there was separation. Instead of open discussion, there were barriers. Information wasn't shared freely. It was divided, restricted, and carefully controlled. Each team was given only a fragment of the bigger picture, with no access to the full scope of what they were trying to understand. It wasn't just inefficient, it was crippling, because science doesn't work in isolation. Progress depends on connection, on the exchange of ideas, on different perspectives colliding, on one discovery building directly on another. Breakthroughs happen when information flows, not when it's locked away behind layers of clearance. But inside this program, flow didn't exist. A materials specialist couldn't fully speak with propulsion experts. Engineers couldn't cross-reference findings with other teams. Even simple questions had to pass through layers of approval, often returning with vague or incomplete answers. Conversations were filtered. Insights were delayed. Sometimes they were denied entirely. And with every restriction, progress slowed. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle where each person holds only a few pieces, and no one is allowed to show theirs to anyone else. You might recognize patterns. You might guess at connections. But without seeing the whole image, you're left working in fragments, never fully certain if you're moving forward or just circling the same ideas. That was the reality inside the program. Effort was constant. Movement was not. The justification, of course, was security. The need to protect sensitive information, to prevent leaks, to ensure that no single individual could expose the entire operation. On paper, it made sense. In practice, it created a system where knowledge was treated as a liability instead of a tool. And that shift came with consequences. Because the more information was restricted, the less effective the scientists became. Not due to lack of skill, but due to lack of access. The very people tasked with understanding the technology were denied the clarity needed to do it. Every step forward required permission. Every idea faced resistance. Over time, frustration replaced momentum. And that raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the system wasn't just flawed, but self-defeating? Because when you design a structure that prevents understanding, you don't just slow progress. You make it impossible. And if progress was truly impossible, then the question shifts. Was this failure accidental or intentional? Because a system that limits knowledge doesn't just protect secrets, it controls outcomes. And when outcomes are controlled, the truth may never be discovered, only managed, contained, and kept just out of reach. And in a project built to uncover the unknown, that might be the most dangerous limitation of all. Not the technology itself, but the system meant to study it. Familiarity with the unthinkable. At some point, the extraordinary stopped feeling extraordinary. That may be the most unsettling part of Bob Lazar's account. Not the craft, not the technology, but the way people around it behaved. What should have triggered alarm, caution, even fear, didn't. Instead, it was treated with a kind of quiet normalcy, like it had been there long enough to lose its edge. Because that's what familiarity does. It dulls the impossible. When Lazar first encountered the craft, the expectation would be obvious. Sterile conditions, strict handling procedures, layers of protection separating humans from something unknown. That's how we treat anything even remotely hazardous. Controlled environments, careful observation, absolute precision. But that wasn't what he saw. The setting felt closer to a standard work environment than a high-risk discovery. The craft wasn't hidden behind impenetrable barriers. It wasn't sealed in isolation. It sat there, exposed, accessible, almost ordinary in the way it was approached. People moved around it, studied it, interacted with it as if it were just another machine. And that raises a difficult question. How do you become that comfortable with something you don't understand? The answer isn't immediate. It takes time, longer than most would expect. Because the first exposure to something unknown creates tension, uncertainty, careful steps. But repeated exposure changes that. What once felt dangerous starts to feel manageable. What once demanded caution becomes routine. Eventually, the presence of the unknown no longer feels like a disruption. It becomes part of the environment. And that's where things shift. Because if the people working on this technology were no longer reacting to it as something foreign, it suggests they had been around it long enough for that reaction to fade. Long enough to adjust. Long enough to normalize what should never have been normal in the first place. That timeline matters. It suggests the discovery didn't happen recently. It wasn't a sudden breakthrough or a new acquisition. It had been there, studied, handled, revisited again and again until the shock wore off, until it became familiar. And familiarity, in this case, might be the most revealing detail of all, because it points to something deeper than the existence of the technology itself. It points to duration, to exposure, to a history that extends further back than most people are willing to consider. The craft wasn't just present. It was part of a system that had already adapted to it. And once a system adapts, it changes how people think, how they react, how they measure what is normal and what isn't. That's the part that lingers. Not that something unexplainable existed, but it had been there long enough for people to stop treating it that way. And if that's true, then the real mystery isn't just what they found, but how long they've been living with it. Because the longer something stays hidden in plain sight, the less shocking it becomes, until one day, the impossible no longer feels impossible at all anymore. If this made you question more than it answered, drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives like this. And watch the next video on your screen, because this story doesn't end here.